situation when she was growing up. Her formal study during her teen years appears to have really focused particularly on language study. She had certificates in both English and French. Though in her late teens, I found it really interesting that she also earned diocesan certificates in Catechesis. So it must be that even as a teenager, she had a strong bent, I would say, for religion. Educational system in Europe is quite different than that in the United States. But it seems, even with that system being different, that her university education was delayed a bit by World War II. As best as I can tell, she did not begin university until she was 29. Obviously very well educated up to that point, but it was 1946. Yeah, should have been 29 in 1946. But I think it's because World War II did such decimation in that area that it wasn't the right time to be pursuing academic studies. When she went to the University of Rome in 1946, again, she focused originally on language studies, and this time her language really was Hebrew. And it's there is where she met Eugenio Zoli and finished her laurea in the Hebrew and Comparative Semitic Literature in 1949. Her specialization, the way that they did that, then the laurea is kind of similar to what we would consider to be doctoral work. But then you would go on it was always considered you go on for a specialization, and her specialization was ancient Semitic peoples, which she finished in 1952. Now, this would have still been before the Second Vatican Council. So I've always surmised that part of the reason why she specialized in the area that she did was, one, because of Zoli. I think she really liked him as a professor a lot, and I think she genuinely fell in love with Hebrew language and literature. I also suspect that because, as a woman, the study of Old Testament under this guise was the closest that she as a woman could get to the field of theology. Women were not able to study theology really. Women were not really able to study theology until after the Second Vatican Council. So this would have been the closest she would have gotten to being able to study theology. And it was shortly after she completed her postdoc work, that's ancient Semitic peoples part that I mentioned, that she began to work with Jonna Gobi in Costanoki School in the heart of Rome. In her writing, Sophia often describes this turn toward working with children as a surprise even to her, because it clearly is not what her educational background had prepared her for. In the years that followed, Sophia continually studied theology, particularly biblical theology, on her own. And the main way that we would have documentation of that is her My Readings essay that's published in the back of Way of Holy Joy. And then also the reading list that Sophia provided to me via Claudia Schmidt. She had recommended those who lived with her in Rome. She would give this to them as a recommended reading list if they wanted to find out more. The reading list was very extensive. It's far beyond what your average layperson in the pew would. I mean, she was reading very high-level theology. And Claudia told me at one point in time that she had asked Sophia, "How many hours do you study the scripture?" And Sophia said, "About 4 hours." And Claudia said, "Every week you spend 4 hours just reading exegetical text?" And Sophia said, "No, about 4 hours a day." So obviously this was a very literate and well-read woman. We also would have evidence that she was taking courses still with Mangilo at the Angelicum, at least the graduate level or above. We have evidence in her journals of her having interviewed personally Vagagini and seems to have had a close, a good working relationship with him. But what is intriguing is she never ended up teaching within a university setting or in a seminary system. She ended up teaching in a couple of Montessori high schools, and then she ended up pouring out her entire lifeblood into CGS. And one could ask the question, well, why was that? Well, the first most evident answer to it would be, well, she had a vocation, right? I mean, her call from God was to do this kind of particular work with children. But we know that our vocations always are appearing within complex life circumstances. So Sophia's personality seems to have been one of a consummate learner, all of us have, if you're in an academic setting, have these kinds of students in your school who take every class that the school has to offer, but never actually intend to go get a professional degree or professional work within theology. I can picture that Sophia, possibly personality-wise, didn't want to enter into the politics of academic life. And I think she probably socioeconomically she didn't need to, and so it was a freedom that she had. I think it, though, is also very possible that she would have had a hard time finding an academic position. When she graduated, it would have been before the Second Vatican Council happened. It's been very difficult for women to make an imprint in the field of theology. I would say Aquinas to this day is very rare in the fact that it has sought a balance of women and men on their theological faculty. The other thing, though, I think that would have stymied an academic career was her view of children as theologians. This is only a guess on my part, but I suspect that when she tried to talk in the theological sphere about children and the children that she was teaching and what she was discovering as a theologian from children, that they probably kind of poo-pooed that idea a bit and stuck coloring books probably in the mailbox, right? So it was something that was just simply not taken seriously within the academic sphere. And I've heard some of that. That's not entirely hypothetical on my part. I've heard a little bit of that from the earliest catechists who went over and studied with her. But then also a glimpse of it I got when Mary and I visited her in 2010, and we were presenting her with the Catherine of Siena Award from Aquinas Institute, which is an award that we as a school, we actually have, I think Sophia was the last one to receive it, but we were giving it to a lay person who had done outstanding work in the field of theology and ministry. And we had decided we were going to give it to Sophia, and it aligned with the graduation of the very first cohort. When we went over to Rome to give it to her and announce this, we had written a letter from the president of the school to take to her to let her know about this. And in the letter, one of the things which our president had signed his name to is that we as a faculty believe that we have been transformed by the work of children, and we have become through our encounter with catechists, we as a faculty our eyes have been open to the work of children in our midst. And that we believed that children had something essential to teach us about the discipline of theology. And when Sophia got to that line, her eyes she held back and she goes, "Is this true?" She said, "Do you as a faculty really believe this?" And I said, "Yeah, I think we do." And she goes, "Unbelievable. It is a miracle." And I thought, there's more. When she said that, I thought, there's more of a story here than what I have glimpsed. When we gave her the award, obviously she was not able to come to the States, but we had a plaque made and mailed it. And I thought, she's not going to care if she gets the plaque. I mean, I'm sure she's gotten like 1,000 honors from academic institutions. And we actually got a letter. It got lost in the mail. And I guess it was Augusta, or somehow it got communicated to me through Rebecca. Sophia wants to know what's happened to the plaque. And we don't know what happened in the vagaries of the Italian mail system. But it turned out, I'm sorry, what did Mary, do you know?
It's in the Tiber.
It's in the Tiber somewhere, yeah. But it turned out the fact that she was trying to figure out what had happened to it, I think it meant a little bit more to her than what I had thought. So obviously we sent another one, and it did make it. So just with that as a bit of context, let's talk about what do we know about the history of CGS and the academy in the US. And here I would say there's a lot more that could be done in tracking this. But what I can figure out so far. Some of the earliest courses in the US and Canada were actually located on university campuses. So Toronto being a prime example of that, and then the University of Notre Dame. We know that one of the very earliest courses in the US happened on the campus of University of Notre Dame, but not given for academic credit. Certainly there were small pools of academics who were interested in CGS, one of the earliest and most prominent being Mark Searle, a very prominent liturgical theologian at University of Notre Dame, who ended up dying way too young. I think he had liver cancer. Something happened and died very quickly. I want to say he was like 47 when he died. And I don't think he himself was a catechist, but his wife, Barbara, was a catechist. And so he was the one who wrote the foreword to the first English edition of RPC. Tina Lillig, our first national director, was a supporter of theological education for catechists and had her master's from CTU. Best guess we can do right now is that the earliest courses that were offered for credit, for academic credit in CGS on university campuses would have been IPS at Loyola, which Catherine did in 1997-98. The following year, so 98-99, was when Barbara Searle, Tina Lillig, and Rebecca Roysevich did it in 98-99. And then the first one we did here at Aquinas was 1999-2000. So very rapid succession that we were able to do a breakthrough in that field. And part of it was because we were all using the same, we were all telling our deans at the exact same time. And so Aquinas, IPS, and CTU are very close. They're all very similar schools, draw a similar sort of population, and they're all in, I don't want to say competition with each other, but they're all trying to get the same students. And so we would have said, like I said to my dean, well, you know, Chicago's doing it. And then if Chicago was doing it, it was fine. Right, so somebody had to break it and say, like, it was okay to do. Yeah.
Where was Greg in this time?
So part of the thing that helped get it into Aquinas in the first place was Greg was already here.
Okay.
Greg was on the very first national board when it was getting started in a basement in Oak Park because he was assigned to St. Giles. So it really helped. What? The national board. He was one of the very, he was on something that got things started.
First national board was 82.
Okay.
First national board. It was like second round of national boards.
Okay. He was in the second round of the national boards. He was at St. Giles.
And then he came here.
And then he came here. And the St. Giles, I mean, it was accidental. It wasn't like he was looking for CGS. He happened to be the parish priest at that time, and where CGS was really getting energy at St. Giles in Chicago. So Greg then allowed me to do my field ed there. It created a hospitality to grow within here. The first place to offer a student advanced standing, which would mean gave her credit when she came in to do an academic degree, appears to be Kathleen Garnis at IPS, so Institute of Pastoral Studies at Loyola in Chicago. And then later, Kate Collins got it from WTU. That seems to have been the second school to have been able to give academic standing. Aquinas first offered, sorry, I said that already, in 1999-2000. So I joined the faculty in 2000 here, and then by luck of the draw, oftentimes, this is what I've said to many of you before, sometimes you feel like you're a pawn on a chessboard way bigger than yourself. So just by luck of the draw, my committee assignment was curriculum and program development. And I oversaw that committee here at a time when we as a school were trying to figure out new programs to develop. And so I happened to be in the right place at the right time to say, because I'd had conversations with Tina Lillig around what is happening within CGS for long-term leadership development to make sure that we are well established to be advocates for CGS within the church as we begin to go out into different dioceses and so forth. So at that time, there were a couple of precipitating things that Tina and I had talked about on the phone, and I'm sure others had raised this conversation as well. That Sophia was getting older, and that for many of us, the only way that we were getting our questions answered about anything was we would write Sophia a letter and Sophia would write back. But we recognized that we needed people unto the future who would be able to think through things theologically in the same way that Sophia thought through things theologically. We recognized that all of our, that we also needed somebody who could think with the mind of Sophia and also think with the mind of Jonna. And so that we needed people to pursue further degrees in theology and in child development in Montessori so that under the future we would be well equipped as a community to continue thinking. We also recognized that we were getting into more complicated relationships with parishes and dioceses, and that catechists oftentimes had great passion and zeal about children, and they'd fallen in love, but when they went to talk to their parish priest, or when they were talking to their parish bishop or the diocesan office, they were using language that was not crossing the divide. That we needed to learn, we needed to be bilingual in this world over here as well as in this world over here, so that we could be full partners in that conversation and not get squashed in the midst of it, and not get also within diocesan offices poo-pooed like, oh, that's really cute, you work with the preschoolers, right? Another need was that if we were going to reach seminaries into the future, which was part of our visionary association goal, we would need to make sure that we had people with the academic background who could begin to teach in seminary system. To be on regular faculty, you need to have a doctorate, but oftentimes you can teach adjunct with a master's degree. So we needed more people with a master's degree. We also recognized many catechists were getting paid a pittance for doing the work that they were doing and not able to pursue this full-time as a vocation because they weren't getting paid a just wage, and that they needed a master's degree in order to be able to be hired full-time and be a DRE in a parish. And then also, we knew that formation leaders, we would be able to help standardize the quality of courses if our formation leaders had more of a background for themselves. We never wanted to make it a requirement to get a master's degree in order to be a formation leader, but we recognized that there was a benefit to formation leaders who were open to getting a master's degree. So we opened at Aquinas the first master's degree with a concentration in catechesis of the Good Shepherd in 2006. At that time, when we did some research just trying to get a lay of the land, we had about 21 people in the US in our association who we knew had graduate degrees, but only about seven who had a master's degree in theology. And of those, not all of them were formation leaders. So it was a small handful of people. We sat down with the National Association Board and met to design the curriculum to make sure that what we were designing heavily focused in the two pillars of Scripture and liturgy. And we worked out an arrangement with the association. We would stick very close to those essentials, those pillars. We would do 30 hours of general theology, and we would grant 18 hours of academic credit to persons in our degree program who did their training through certified National Association courses. We would give 6 academic credit hours to each level. 3 credit hours basically for completing the course, and 3 for finishing your album and having it written or having it checked by a certified formation leader at a master's level or above. That was important for the academic institution's relationship with ATS, because you need to make sure that it meets academic credentials. I can go into that, but I won't do that now. I'm sure that is not the main reason why you're here. But it's this jiggle, I'm just saying it's this jiggle that you're doing as an academic institution between the norms of what constitutes credit and what also is still meeting the interest of CGS and the National Association. So at this point in time, I am happy to say we're in our 5th cohort. We have about 50 graduates and another 8 currently in the program. And a lot of those goals that we had when we first started in those conversations with Tina have been realized. If right now, I hope to God, we're going to start another graduate cohort in January, but if for some reason the eclipse happens and it never takes place, I would say, Diane, it has been enough. What has happened as a fruit has been fabulous. So what I've covered here is 4 different ways in which CGS has intersected with the academic communities in the U.S. One is all of the courses around in universities and seminaries in which CGS, just reading RPC, has begun to happen. It's not a whole course on CGS, but places where in catechetical coursework, people have been introduced to CGS and interested and begun to do more research on Sophia. The other thing that's happened is university settings in which they've just hosted courses on their site, made their university available. The infrastructure that they've got set oftentimes is a great place to host course. A third thing that has happened, though, is whether or not the university begins to offer academic credit for coursework that's offered. And then the fourth thing is whether or not a university or seminary system offers a degree program with a concentration in CGS. Does that make sense? Sometimes those all get conflated. The first two, there's really absolutely no challenges with. Any place it's great to collaborate with the association to host, or a formation leader to host a course on it. So I won't even cover those two. The other two, there's some sticky wickets that we just want to raise to think about a little bit. So for a student that is already enrolled in a degree program, it can be a real blessing if CGS is offered as an elective within a university's regular curriculum. It can introduce especially young people to CGS in a way that it couldn't. One of the challenges is that our formation course structure, however, does not easily align with the way that an academic course is usually taught. So in a normal university setting, and I think this would be true for both undergrad and grad level, usually you have 1 hour of in-class time per 3 hours of outside reading. So that means that you meet in a 3-hour class a week, like a 3-credit class. You would meet with your students 3 hours a week for a 15-week semester. And then, so you would only have 45 hours in class time with them. And then you'd have this, Carolyn, you had 150 hours of reading outside. We would tend to flip that. We want the face-to-face time with the students, and the reading is a little bit less. Though you could see if everybody was really writing their element pages, it could easily fill up the amount of time. So in that sense, it makes sense to do like a 3-credit or 6 credits per level in order to get the number of hours that you need in a course. And even then, in level 2 and 3, that's going to be tight, because level 2 and 3 often take more than 90 to 100 hours. But level 1, I think you could do it. The other thing is you would probably never be able to offer level 2 and 3 unless you had, Tuition. Tuition in an average university setting, whether at undergrad or graduate, tends to run about $600 per credit hour. If you do that for 6 credit hours, you're talking $3,600 for your level 1 course, right? Who wants to do that? When you can get $500, you can get a good quality level 1 course with a certified formation leader right down the block. The other challenge would be that there's only, in order to teach in a university setting, you would need to have at least the master's degree. There's only about 30 formation leaders in the country who would have both the academic credentials and are also a certified formation leader for the National Association. An academic course tends to meet in most universities every week, so you'd have to have this university, one of these 30 people living in your city who's able to go there every week, right?
10 minutes away.
10 minutes away. Well, you're lucky, yes. Right, they're lucky to have you there. Yes, this is true too. Right. And you're going to need to have a full setup atrium environment that's at least easily accessible to the students of your university to go to, or your university has to create a full setup environment. Like you can teach intensive courses within universities, as I did at University of Santa Clara one summer, which was great. They gave me 2 rooms which were stuffed full of desks, like stuffed full of 70 people, like a room this size, 70 desks in it. I had to move all the desks into the other room, and I set up a whole atrium environment in one room and the classroom in the other. Well, then it turns out they all had night class in the same classroom because they're all used to being able, like your classrooms and universities, we don't need to go into that either. The verdict of we want to increase opportunities for CGS formation to be offered in university and seminary curriculum for current degree students offering regular elective. It's probably, though, not from a university's point of view, a good option financially for people who want CGS training in your local region, but who aren't already in a university program. Because most people aren't going to want to pay $3,600 to take a class. Seminaries often have a little bit more flexibility. They're generally supported by means other than tuition. And I'm not talking here about graduate schools of theology. I'm talking like Kenrick Seminary. Or Shelley Finkler in this past year has done both courses at St. Tikhon's and St. Herman's Seminary in the Orthodox traditions. And they don't run on regular. They offered it within the campus, but they didn't offer academic credit because just financially it doesn't make sense. Or in some places, like the place out in St. Herman's, the seminary covers the cost of the course for its seminarians. I'm skipping over my notes because I want to make sure Karen I want to give Karen the halftime too. Where do we go from here? One of the things I would say that I see as, I just want to make, I don't think it's problems, I just want to think we just need to be creative and in good conversation with each other and thinking about it, is how do we work in collaboration between the university setting and the National Association? Universities can be big places and can be elephants in converse. Like we can feel very small in conversation, and sometimes you can end up, when you are very large, you can end up accidentally stepping on ants that you didn't even see there. So the university has its own system, its own way of doing things, and it's not used to really probably being in partnership conversation. And we want to make sure that this remains true partnership conversations, and that the schools who are active and involved in doing CGS leadership development and coursework are non-competitive with each other, that we're making sure we're really communicating with each other well. And also honoring a certain kind of theological neutrality that is faithful to the essentiality that was so core to Sophia. Schools oftentimes have reputations of leaning in particular directions theologically. And we need to make sure within CGS that we don't accidentally damage the movement by affiliating ourselves with places that have agendas of their own. And this is why that partnership piece is really, really important. But there's lots of areas for great collaboration, increasing respect for Sophia Cavalletti's scholarship in CGS in the academic setting, translation of Cavalletti's Italian work, like all the work that she did was not related to CGS, infrastructure for unique CGS gatherings. There's a lot of great potential that's out there for collaboration. So let me stop there and turn over Karen.
I turn over Karen.
Not turn over Karen, turn it over to Karen. Yeah. From an association point of view, what do you see?
It's fitting very nicely with the sun and the eclipse image, isn't it? I appreciate the fact that we can be in conversation, although we're really just able to touch the tip of the iceberg in many ways in this regard, because there is much to be said. We find this is very multifaceted. It has implications that work with both ways. One of our association's key vision statements is that in addition to current sites, courses in Catechesis of the Good Shepherd will be held in colleges, universities, and seminaries across the United States. We would like to see that happen. How that happens hasn't all been worked out, and it needs continual discussion and evaluation according to who they are, who is it we're with. And it raises questions and attention that we have to hold. How do we offer Catechesis of the Good Shepherd in these settings and maintain the integrity of the approach for children and adults? What are the gifts to such communities, and what are the challenges when we bring CGS in academia? And so when we turn this prism, we have to think about another facet of this. And I want to, before I enter into that, I also want to, well, there are several things I kept wanting to say. Oh, but Anne, I want to say this. In conversation,
Yeah.
Certainly, as you know, I'm one of the graduates of MAPS, CGS. And when we first started in the first cohort, it was certainly embarking on new territory. And so coming into this, and I was already working for the association, so part of it was I wanted to see if I could become better versed in understanding theology, the scholarship, and also to see how Sophia's work intersected perhaps with what is out there. And I think that the experience of being part of this world, in fact, I remember Anne talking to us about thinking about us being as theologians, and I never thought of myself as being a theologian. And, oh, really? I could think of myself as a theologian. And I think it helped to definitely hear and start trying to figure out what that language is, so that maybe I could be better versed in communicating with other dioceses or a priest and everything like that. And I also was very happy to find that every time we walked through something that we were paralleling something that Sophia said, and nothing of what she has done is radical to the point of extreme. She is well within the framework of all the other scholarship that was going on. The flip side of that is, though, that I don't want what I have experienced that role to make anyone who wants to be a formation leader, let alone a catechist, feel inadequate that they don't have that degree. And so I'm just not something I tout. It's something that just helped me at the time. And it didn't guarantee me to have anything more elevated. So that's a real caution, because there is this attitude that just starts to pervade because of the way that academia is, that you have to have this degree in order to make yourself viable and credible in the framework. And we are a small grassroots ministry in the world. And we need to stay that way. So I want to tell you why I think we need to consider this also, because in fact, actually since being here, I've had 4 or 5 different possibilities of things having to do with academia in some schools in one way or the other. And so we're always facing with, how are we going to approach this? What are we going to give? How are we going to meet this in a sensitive way that keeps the spirit and the integrity of CGS the way it needs to be, the gift that Sophia and Jonna gave us? I want to begin with a moment of Sophia at the end of her life. At the conclusion of the Concilio meeting that was in 2007, we had gathered in Sophia's dining room and of her apartment, which is a place that I think few have really had gone. We were having dinner with her. We were a part of the Concilio, and it would be her birthday, her 90th birthday was a month before. And while everyone was sitting in chairs around, and she was also sitting down, many of us would stand up before her and share how our appreciation for her. And one by one, people would stay up and say these in various languages, Spanish, Italian, English, for what she had done by giving this gift of Catechesis of the Good Shepherd to children and adults. We would say things like, Sophia, thank you so much for saying yes to what God was calling you to do with children. And in her usual manner, she's sitting there listening. And then at one point, quietly, she says, I never said yes. You heard that before? So we kept going on. People still kept saying it anyway. Thank you for saying yes. And this appreciative statement kept coming up. And finally, when she said again the same thing, I never said yes, Augusta speaks up and says in Italian, which I wish that I could mimic, Sophia, the red carpet was rolled out and you walked on it. You are the one that took the steps for the children. So stop saying you never said yes. You walked on that red carpet. I love that. And then later in the evening, she remarked, it was the children who saved me from being a mouse in the library. So incredible amount of study and scholarship. In fact, I was astounded to realize how many articles that she has written, or even introductions to Bibles that she had been a part of, that commentaries that we hadn't even seen. They're in Italian. She loved to study. She was always about that, right? She was in academia for a number of years before ever embarking on this journey with Jonna and the children. And as Anne mentioned, she's a consummate learner. She longed to delve deeply and to quench her thirst for knowledge and understanding. And, it would be wonderful to know, was that first sparked in her? Was it when she was really little and she had talked about how her mother taught her to read? Or was it because she had gotten these particular certificates at different points? She has so much in her that was curiosity, I think. She shared once that when she was studying at the university, she had told me this at one time, she was not allowed to view the special reference books at one of the libraries, which may have been the Biblical Institute. I'm not exactly sure which one it was, because only the priests were allowed to enter there. So one of her professors went with her so she could do her research. And they brought the books to a small room for her so that she could reference and study from them, and the priest wouldn't see her. I just really wish I knew more about Sophia's experiences in that way with academia. And doesn't that story remind you a little bit about Maria Montessori?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. It was following the conclusion of World War II in 1946, as Anne mentioned, when she was 29, that Sophia entered the university. And we really don't know enough but to imagine the context of the place in which she was being in Rome, because her family did not move from Rome during World War II. They stayed there. And so what was that like for her? And yet her desire to continue to learn and study, and the scholarship was important to her. I think it's important, though, for us to consider the encounters with people along the way that helped pave the way for her to do what she had done. And one was with a young adult woman that was during World War II. Sophia had, I think, a volunteer position with St. Vincent de Paul Society, I think, or St. Vincent Association, something like that. It was in 1943 to 44. She was 26 to 27 years old. And she had met Irma. And Irma was 20. So there was only a few years younger than Sophia. And Irma and her family had been in the south of Italy, but as the war had started down there, those families were displaced, and they were refugees, and they were moving up into the further part of the country. And they lived in really despicable areas. And I think the society that was helping them was serving them in different ways. And Irma worked in a brick factory. So Sophia had met her, and in this conversation, which I wish we could see, Irma revealed that she had never made her first communion, and she really wanted to do so. And so Sophia had offered to help her prepare. But what I think is interesting is that she went about the appropriate method of doing that, which was to take the catechism and bring it to Irma and have Irma study that, and she would ask her the questions, and Irma would reply with the definitions of those questions. But what she started noticing is how challenging that was for Irma to do. And it just felt like it wasn't life-giving at all. And then Sophia writes this that I think is so important for us to pay attention to. She said, I don't recall what we read together, but I brought her the gospel. What I do remember are Irma's eyes. They filled with tears as we read. And so let's take note of that. She remembered her eyes. She remembered how Irma responded in the face of being present with the word, the gospel. It was that encounter that I think helped plant a seed for what happened 10 years later. And so when Catechesis of the Good Shepherd was born in 1954, Sophia was 37 years old at that point. Religious education in the church was largely taught using the catechism and through memorization of the definitions. So we have to keep in mind, she had already gained quite a bit of experience teaching religion, but she describes then her first encounter with the three boys who came to her because one of the parents had asked, would you help them prepare for their first communion? And they were there together 2 hours, remember, that's what we know, and studying that first chapter of Genesis. And as that time was drawing to a close, Sophia noticed the tears welling up in the eyes of one of the boys who did not want the time to end, who said he wanted to come every day. And he was the same boy who was very impatient at the beginning because he had to go to his soccer practice, so he was concerned about missing soccer practice. Again, Sophia notes when she responds about what makes the difference for her, she talks about the encounter and looking at someone's eyes. Sophia is clear when she speaks about Catechesis of the Good Shepherd and its beginnings, that this was not an initiative of adults, but rather that the children who were and are the compelling force of the initiative. To me, that is also very significant for us to pay attention to. Because often, especially when we interact in an academic or a school environment, or even when we think about the curricula that are prepared for children, it's all about the adult, right? Or the publishing house or whoever else is going to create it. So we are doing something so countercultural We have to keep that in mind. How does that impact when we go into these settings who are interested in knowing more about Catechesis of the Good Shepherd? But for them, for Sophia and Jonna, it was never their initiative. It was the initiative of the children. After a few years, and I think this is also so important for us to keep in mind, with being groups of children in the seedlings of an atrium environment that they were still struggling to figure out what that was going to be, that they were using the catechism, using Montessori materials to help introduce the catechism, they would begin to ask these questions like, who are these children in their relationship with God? And what does this relationship look like? What does the face of God need to be for them, this children at this point? And then she encounters 3 more children. I mean, there are several already, but these particular ones, Sergio, Massimo, and Rita, she writes about, she said it led them to the experience, a huge decision for them to let go of the catechism and as their main method of teaching, because she noticed that these children had forgotten the richness of the biblical language. In the face of learning the catechism, for one boy, he was indifferent. He didn't care to study anything. He didn't really just care. He was just indifferent. The other boy seemed to have a sense that he knew it all. And then when she asked Rita about what her understanding of the church was and wanted her to place it in context with the scripture, that's when she realized they don't know the biblical language at all. It was lost for them. Now, I would say in some ways maybe they never had actually had enough of that. That was 4 years into the budding aspect of Catechesis of the Good Shepherd. So it's time that has been happening, and we have to keep that in mind as well, because many, many times we're faced with this tension of people wanting to rush through and offer something before they really had a chance to explore what it means with children. It was then that Sophia realized, and Jonna, that they needed to be faithful forever to the method of parables. She says, studying the catechism in that way, trying to come up with the definitions, wasn't nourishing the heart. One of the things we say about Catechesis of the Good Shepherd is this wonderful marrying between Bible and liturgy, but I also think it's the marrying between head, heart, and hand. And they also found that Montessori framework gave them the orientation for allowing the child to be the teacher. So why is this significant for us? Because they were looking for moments of meaningful encounter for the children, something that would make a difference for them in their relationship. As we have begun to bring Catechesis of the Good Shepherd as a method of catechesis to academia in the U.S. and converse what that means, we certainly have a great deal of potential to influence religious education as a whole. I think we might all agree that there is a real challenge in religious education in the world. We see it over and over again. And it's trying to find how do you meaningfully nurture faith at various moments in the life journey. And what we need to know is how this understanding is rooted in the values for the framework we have for adult formation as well. We are enthusiastic in presenting Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, but as we've mentioned, as Anne has mentioned, we also need to know how best to talk the language of the others that we're with, and not encounter them in such a way that they are put off by we're thinking that we know it all kind of thing. We don't want that. What most influenced Sophia and Jonna and their catechist collaborators was the thirst for discovering the mysterious relationship between God and children. It's interesting for us to be aware that Sophia, for all her academic study, didn't necessarily begin this work with her studies. In making the decision to adjust the approach to the parable method, Sophia and Jonna said that they found they were before a limitless sea, a richness and depth in the Christian message conserved in considerable biblical and liturgical sources, enriched by 2,000 years of reflection. But what they were also aware of is that they could not give the children all of that limitless sea. that they had to be through, and she says this very clearly, and I think this is also a guide for us. They needed, through careful study, observation, prayer, and discussion, choose what children most needed in order to be nurtured in their relationship with God. And to me, these are important points for us to keep in mind for how we should present CGS in various communities. Or when people come to us, and we have these questions often, what is it? We want to bring it here, we want to bring it there. Well, so this is what you need to do. You need to spend time with children. You need to observe them. You need to have a careful study of the themes and the biblical and liturgical sources as they have done. You need to have a discussion about how that is working with the children. Whether we are working with academia, other denominations of faith traditions, in churches, schools, or dioceses, we need to continually convey that their approach wasn't directly from the books. It was with the children. It was in encounters with them. Over and over again, Sophia comments that their work did not first come from books or their own ideas concerning what they thought the children should be given. But in fact, she has said, it came from what the children appeared to be asking of them. Time and time again, they recognized that their work was always guided by the children themselves, that they gave presentations with materials that the children either threw out right away or at other times, over time, they recognized that that just wasn't resonating. And they said what they began to recognize was that a certain element would never draw forth the quality of response in children that often filled us with wonder. So maybe the adult thought that it was going to be a great idea, but the children just weren't responding. They recognized, too, that the children do not know how to teach. Well, that's a little bit of a problem, isn't it, when we say the child is our teacher? And cannot explain, so they cannot explain explicitly what they understand or how they respond. So she says children's method consists of the attitudes, responses, and phrases that are expressed spontaneously, and they often come when one least expects it. So that's where your observation has to come into play. The knowledge that Sophia and Jonna recognized they needed to have above all was how to know how to attend to and interpret all that they were experiencing with children. So therefore, every time that they had those meetings after the Atrium sessions, they would have the chance to talk about what they were seeing. She said, it is not easy for us as adults, even if we are theoretically convinced of it, to be learners of this indirect teaching method, this subtle guidance that the little ones are giving us. We need to attune our ears and ready our eyes to catch hold of the half notes as a good musician, to perceive the varying shades of color as a good painter, so that the work of art the catechesis is may truly be realized. And indeed, it is a work of art. It's a scientific method in some ways. I mean, there's science to it, but there's also that work of art. The other thing I think it's important for us to keep in mind is that Sophia and Jonna did not record only the responses for the children that they served in their atrium. What they started to see happening is that they shared this with others of various places around the world. And they began to see the similar responses happening in varying environments, whether that was geographically different or socioeconomically different or racially different. It was indifferent, and they started to begin to recognize that this was something that was happening to, as Maria Montessori also has spoken of, the child. They wanted to continue to validate what they were seeing. So sometimes, she says, their validation came from authoritative books, while other times they realized that they were tapping into really the approach of the early church, which over time had been lost in its significance. She loved to say, "We invented nothing." So the other thing I think is important for us to recognize is the impact, though, of those studies on her. And most particularly, I want to just lift up one place where she spoke about The relationship and the study that she got to do with Eugenio Zoli had an enormous impact. I believe she served with him as a volunteer assistant for about 4 years during the time that she was 3 to 4 years during the time she was studying. But what she says about him, I think, is so incredibly important for us. She said that he, working with him, opened up the Bible to her in a completely new way. She discovered the richness of the text, that new horizons in understanding various meanings of the Bible, the value of the Old Testament on its own, not just in connection to the New Testament. And she said the experience was significant and profound, as it not only gave her a new level of knowledge, but also nourished her heart. And she said at that time, and even since we probably see this to some extent, the study of the Bible wasn't just really considered that important by most lay people. It really didn't happen. It wasn't permitted, but it wasn't happening. And so she also noted that being with him, those encounters of conversation with him, had far more meaning than even reading his writings. So it was, again, another place of encounter. And she also discovered the golden thread. She grew to understand the Midrashic method, and especially had recognized a sense of unity, that the Bible is one book, that there is one God speaking and acting in different times and places. And it's through this study through this kind of study and her work with children that I think motivated Sophia to begin to share what she and Jonna were doing with others. And I also feel like that she is giving a place of, it seems to me, and I have to only presume this because we really don't know enough about this, that with her encounters with children, she would then go back to do this study and find and make these links, but that she was doing a place, I want to say, weaving this tapestry of a sense of understanding how God is in the world. And that's where we understand God's plan and all the sorts of those themes that have come together. I think she wove that together in such a unity that really not very many people talk about it here and there, different theologians, but she got to put it together. And I think that's why it speaks so much to adults as well, because it makes sense to us and something we've not heard. Everything else has been a piecemeal kind of thing. We don't really know when she first began the training that she did. She started, and how her formation, and nothing has been written out and said you need to do formation in this way in some respects. But when she first was invited in 1975 to do courses in the United States, she